There is a lot of talk these days about toxicity online. Most of it's coming from the woke in the form of accusations, things like toxic masculinity. And I just had a discussion just the other day where I was accused of being toxic just for stating some facts. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But like most things, accusations of toxic behavior is more often than not a reflection of the person actually making the claim than it is about whatever it is that they're talking about. So today on Renegade News Live, we're discussing some real toxic behavior and how the real toxin is the attacks on freedom of speech. Welcome back to Renegade News Live. I'm your host, Glenn Kowalski. Every week on this channel, we discuss things like breaking through cancel culture, how to create a cancel-proof business, getting back your privacy and your data sovereignty, and creating the kind of income and free times that's needed to pursue your life mission. I'm your host, Glenn Kowalski, and if you can give me 5, that's right, just type 5 in the comments right now. I'll send you my Renegade Business cheat sheets absolutely free. In those cheat sheets, you'll discover the exact system that we use to make your business completely cancel-proof, even in the super cancel-charged environment. Good morning, Renegades. I'm just going to check and make sure our stream's working okay. I'm sorry we're running a little bit late today. For some reason, our stream wasn't kicking off, so I'm just going to go make sure and check it off that it actually is running. And it does seem to be, so we're in good shape, I think. So that's perfect. So we'll get right on with it. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I hope you get a bit of free time today to celebrate that or anything else that you want to celebrate. I'm giving you my permission to have a green beer on my behalf or whatever it is that the libation of your choice happens to be. You have total permission for it today. We are live today exclusively on YouTube, which is why it's really weird that we ran into a streaming issue, but we'll be simulcasting on Rumble starting really soon, potentially as soon as next week, and we're super excited about that, really looking forward to it. We'll also start running some live streams over there exclusively on Rumble in the future where we can have some conversations that might get a little bit too risque or a little bit too pointed for this particular platform. Anyway, it's great to see all of our live viewers here. If you're watching or if you have any questions, just let me know in the comments, and I'm going to try and keep an eye on those. If you have any questions or anything to add, or just want to say hello, just pipe up, and I'm going to watch out for you there. And otherwise, let's just kind of dive right in. The advent of the internet has brought about many positive changes, but it's also caused some really serious problems. And one of those issues is the rise of these cancel culture warriors, who are individuals who take an extreme stance and feel that anyone who disagrees with them should be canceled or publicly shamed and ostracized. These cancel culture warriors have really descended upon the world of online business especially, and they're some of the most toxic and angry individuals on the face of the earth, in my humble but correct opinion. And they're really quick to accuse others of toxic behavior, like toxic masculinity. I hear that all the freaking time. But at the same time, they're spewing this vitriol and this hatred towards anyone that they disagree with. And obviously, this is starting to have a really profound, damaging effect on business owners, especially business owners like us who are finding ourselves that we're on the wrong side of these cyber bullies as they're attacking us. And at its core, these cancel culture warriors are driven by a need for control over what they deem to be acceptable beliefs and behaviors in their social networks and in their professional networks. And that would be fine if they were just sticking to their own social networks and their own professional networks. I don't want to deal with them anyway. But the problem is they start crossing over into ours all the time. And they seek to stifle discourse which contradicts their own set of morals and values, whatever those happen to be. And they use extreme tactics like name-calling, bullying, swearing, intimidation, and all these other forms of bigotry while they're calling anybody who disagrees with them a bigot most of the time. And worse than that, it can often go beyond just shaming people that they don't agree with. A lot of those cancel culture warriors, they also try to silence opposing voices using tactics such as doxing and internet mobbing. So they're releasing private information online in order to harass someone and encouraging others to jump on that same bandwagon to join their crusade against whoever they perceive as their enemy of the week. And they often try to present themselves as moral crusaders who are seeking justice for some cause or another. But in reality, their calls for justice are really just hiding malicious intent, and they're ultimately using them as an excuse to target anybody who disagrees with them. So that makes them extremely dangerous. Again, that's in my humble but ultimately correct opinion. So just the other day, I got involved with this discussion. I'll call it a discussion. that other person will call it an argument, with one of these toxic individuals. And really it's quite silly, and I've had worse. But this one was recent, so that's why I'm going to talk about it. And what happened was basically I presented a few opinions. They were based on facts that I had laid out. And I did that in a fairly straightforward manner. And this particular person didn't like what I had to say. So I presented these facts in a straightforward manner, and then I stated what my opinion was. And I asked a couple of questions that, of course, ultimately never got answered. Now, this person, on the other hand, they started accusing me of being one of those men and acting like an ass, and entire comment thread full of other insults. And as you read through her comments to other individuals on that same thread, it was full of F yous, F off, and all these other insults going towards anybody who had an opinion that disagreed with hers. But apparently in the conversation, we were the ones who were toxic. Now, the really funny part is, and maybe even the ironic part was, she was being toxic over some perceived meanings in the comments that never actually even existed. She was reading more into it than was actually even there. And now, admittedly, I have to give this girl props. She did not attempt to silence through censorship. There was no reporting going on, so I have to give her mad props for that. But essentially, the discussion did come down to her being offended by some words and actions that she could have just as easily chosen to ignore, and it wouldn't have changed a thing in her life. And the truth is, your right to be offended does not cancel my right to free speech. And I think that's a vital principle that we all have to adhere to. And especially in a case like this, where there was really nothing that should have even been taken as remotely offensive, but apparently was. And the problem was, this toxic individual saw an opinion that was different from her own, and that caused a negative reaction. And in my opinion, that is really the very definition of a toxic train wreck. It's a definition of a toxic, having this negative reaction. But given all that, and for all that ranting and raving that went on, there's this trend right now that's even more toxic, and it's the big, it's really the big elephant in the room, and it's certainly more dangerous than individuals who just decide to do these things. And that thing is big tech censorship, who are taking it on themselves to keep those cancel culture warriors and the super woke and really anyone who's pushing the current narrative happy. And over the past 3 years, there's been so many social media platforms that have taken action against what they call false or misleading information by removing posts or suspending accounts or creating notices. And they're otherwise silencing any type of, specifically a particular type of speech. One of the good examples that I like to talk about is Kyle Rittenhouse. Great example, because he gathered such national attention, and many Americans, they went to social media to voice their support of him. Now, under the law, Rittenhouse, like any other criminal defendant, was deemed innocent until proven guilty at that time. And eventually he was proven innocent and he was acquitted of the charges. But Facebook designated any support of Rittenhouse as being praised for a mass murderer, and they took many of the posts in support of him down. Then, of course, we have the entire January 6th situation, one that none of us can ignore. And in that case, evidence was suppressed and censored, and lives were actually ruined because of that censorship. Tucker Carlson just had a recent segment about that. We talked about that in another live stream. So anyway, this cancel culture and censorship got this new wind back in about 2020. And we started to see this terminology, things like fact checkers, I can't talk today. Misinformation and disinformation became this global tsunami of censorship for anyone, really, who had a different opinion than whatever the mainstream narrative was. But we know from history, and it's proven that often opinions and beliefs that are only supported by often a small minority, maybe just one person, often those opinions are right. And we also know that opinions and beliefs that are held by a large majority or a government body or any other authority are often proven wrong. And this isn't a new thing. We've seen it since the 17th century when Galileo was sentenced to life for his opinion. And, because he had a different opinion about how the earth revolved around the sun. And so he was sentenced to life in prison. And now we know that he was right, or at least the accepted opinion is that he was right. There's a flat earth movement that disagrees with that. And I'm not going to get into that whole thing today, but these people should have, the flat earthers and everybody else should have the right to provide their evidence and then let the best evidence come to the surface. That's what we're here for. That's what free speech and free expression is all about, is giving everybody the right to present their own opinion, their right to give their expression, and let's let the best ideas float to the top. Another place we've seen this really a lot recently was in the World Health situation. I mean, there's been tons of examples where individuals were banned for conspiracy theories, and those conspiracy theories later turned out to be true. Now, of course, the Constitution in the US is supposed to protect your freedom of speech. It varies from country to country. Other countries have different rules on freedom of speech. Canada really effectively doesn't have freedom of speech anymore. Well, we've talked about that before. We'll talk about that later. The US is supposed to protect your freedom of speech. Other countries do the same. And for the most part in the US, they do protect that. Now, of course, even in that case where it's supposed to be protected by law, things like the Twitter file shows that there's plenty of violations of that, and that doesn't always happen. But let's just assume for a second there really was freedom of speech at the national level. Big tech has introduced this new issue in the fight against cancel culture and this toxic cancel culture, because there is no First Amendment protection against private companies who are censoring and blocking your information. Now, just to kind of go off topic for just a sec, as a bit of a side, I find it really hilarious when like socialists and wokies on the left are trying to invoke this, well, shouldn't a private company be able to do what they want? It's their company, right? And they try to use that argument with me when you know that those people are spending the rest of their time fighting against any type of freedom that that business might have. I think that whole thing is just hilarious and disingenuous and totally ludicrous. But anyway, here is the problem with big tech censorship. Big tech and the big tech industry isn't even close to being a free market. I mean, I agree. I agree with what they're saying, that a business should be able to do whatever they want within their business. They should be able to censor anybody they want. They should be able to not do business with anybody they want. And they should be able to treat that with their own integrity in mind and treat their business the way they want to. Hell, I'm going to ban your ass, and I'll do it in a heartbeat if you're talking in my living room and if you're toxic and I don't feel like dealing with you anymore. That's my right. I'm going to censor your ass. That isn't censorship. But because the world of big tech, it doesn't work that way. The companies at the top, the Facebooks, the Twitters, they're there because they've gotten favors from government, they've gotten tax dollars, tax breaks, those types of things. There's a super high cost of entry. New companies can't just enter that market. So what's happened is there's this handful of private companies who govern the forums for public discourse, and it's really become a monopoly. We've seen that across big tech with beyond social media, with hosting platforms and all these other places who have banded together to promote this one type of speech that they happen to agree with. So what's happened is there's now, this public forum is so limited, and they can dictate to who's allowed to speak and what they may say. And that alone isn't a new problem. There was a speech given to Congress about corporate power given by Franklin D. Roosevelt. And he said that the liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerated the growth of private power to a point where it becomes stronger than the democratic state itself. That, in its essence, is fascism. Ownership of government by an individual, by a group, or by any controlling private power. Now, I'm not a Roosevelt fan, and I'm not a fan of really any politician, but what he said was really true, that the tyranny of private companies is no better than the tyranny of government. And a free speech is so important that it can't be curtailed by a democratically elected government of the United States, then there's really no rationale as to why a small number of massive corporations can do so right now. And simply because their not part of the government doesn't lessen the danger they present. So whether you think that they have the right to do it or not, the power that they control in the market means that that ability to censor a single opinion is extremely dangerous. And Americans, and really anyone anywhere in the world, they can't really enjoy any measure of free speech. Well, there's an individual or group who can restrict it. So whether it's the government restricting it in your country, whether it's just a shared opinion across a monopoly power, you can't have that freedom of speech if you can't actually talk and get your word out there. And theoretically, kind of like we said earlier, censorship of an individual social media platform shouldn't be an issue. If there was a multitude of different alternatives available, similar to what we have as a restaurant or a grocery store, they should be able to let in whoever they want because there's a ton of them that you can choose to go to. But in reality, in this space, there's really only a select few companies that have that basic monopoly over social media, and there's very few feasible replacements. Fortunately, that is going to change. And it's going to change in the future with decentralization, Web 3.0. It's going to make a number of differences. There's free speech friendly competitors who are trying to enter the market, but we've already talked about how difficult it is for those companies. There's such a high barrier of entry. And we're in this market that's so far from free that it's going to take a while before we can get past these big monopolies that are controlling the market. And that's the way I see it, the real toxicity out there. And that's why it's my particular mission in life to help business owners in that tech space to bulletproof their business against those encroaching problems of censorship, cancel culture, and wokeism in general. Because that's really the only way that we can build a world that's worth living in. Because look, the chronically woke would love to create a planet where only the words, thoughts, and expressions that they agree with would ever see the light of day. Worse yet, those same people have lost their ability to think for themselves, and they just accept the prevailing narrative of the day from the government and the mainstream media on whatever their opinions should be. So regardless of the facts that you provide, if it disagrees with what their idols on TV are saying to them, your points are discarded as misinformation, toxic masculinity, or plain old hate speech. But this utterly toxic attitude leads us down a road where we'll never find the answer to the world's most pressing problems. Because often, and I would say probably even more often than not, the prevailing opinions or the views of government, big tech, and the media are completely incorrect. And that is all the time that we have for today for Renegade News Live. Join us next Friday at 12 p.m. EST, that's 1 p.m. in New York and 10 a.m. on the West Coast, for the next episode of Renegade News Live. And remember, if you just type in 5 in the comments, we'll send you a reminder, plus you'll get our cheat sheets. I'm Glenn Kowalski, and if you love freedom of speech, and if you want to make a bigger impact while you're pursuing your life's mission, you need to be a renegade. So I'll see you next time.